Hello, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is the Ukraine War Frontline update for the 4th of April 2023. Before we get to the frontline, let's just have a little look at what the ISW talks about in their discussion bits at the beginning of their daily report. And a lot of it is given over to the death of Maxim Fomin, or Tatarsky, Vladlen Tatarsky, who was assassinated in St. Petersburg. And there's a lot of talk in Russian circles about this being actually the work of Alexei Navalny, or he's in prison, so his supporters, his group, and so on and so forth. This is an interesting time because, as the ISW points out, there's no single narrative going on here. And I don't know what really that represents. Official Russian responses to Fomin's death failed to generate a single narrative in the information space and led to disjointed responses from prominent pro-war voices. So there's no real clear accusation that it is indeed Ukraine, even though there's someone that's been arrested. Who is she working for? Is the first question. If you believe that her admissions are have some kind of veracity. Was she working on behalf of Navalny's lot, or Ukraine, or pro-Ukraine factions within Russia? And then there are the claims that, hey, this is just typical Kremlin MOD activity, so on and so forth. So that takes up a lot of their space for conversation. Well, if you go to the northeast sector, the axis going from Kupiansk down to Svatova to Kreminna, not a lot of news to report. ISW says that usual places, unsuccessful ground attacks at Nevska, Serebranska Forest, Bilorivka, Verkhnokamianska, so on and so forth, Torska, Nevska, Terny, Makivka, etc., etc. One thing that it does suggest, and looking at their own mapping, so this is their interactive map. This is Kreminna and the bridgehead to the west of Kreminna, and it's actually quite a jagged line here, and I don't know what to make of this. It's not really represented in the in Deep State Map or any other mappers. There was this geolocated footage of the Russians attacking Ukrainian forces here. So I've moved my map a little bit in line with some of these claims, so that it's a little salient there on the ISW map is this salient here, but it's kind of possibly quite jagged up here. There appears to be some movement. At least there are claims and some verification of those claims, but it's just not reflected anywhere else. But so just bear in mind that this area from Ploschanka down to the salient going to the east to the west of Kreminna might have some gains for the Ukrainians there. We'll wait to see if that pans out with other mappers, but other than that, not really much to report. Torska and Terny and Makivka and Nevska are the usual places that are mentioned, but it's often towards there, and it might well be that the activity is happening right back here on the lines, but it's just in the direction of those places. Something I often talk about. And then Bilorivka, Verkhnokamianska, there could be some movement of maps there. I haven't had time to look at the ISW map to see whether that is. Well, in fact, I guess we could go there right now. So yes, if you look here, that is just north of Zolotorivka. So that would be here. There is your normal Bilorivka area there, but as far as Verkhnokamianska, it might just be. Oh, there's a bit of blue there, claimed counterattack there. So I need to look at my map to see whether ISW have some more information about what happened in exactly that area of the geolocated tank battle. That there's now some more footage coming out of that. It's pretty hardcore. A bit of footage concerning that tank battle there, and the tank rolling over trenches with people in the trenches in order it didn't I believe it was running out of ammunition, so that is what they did before the troops could arrive in the IFV to clear out the trench system there and take up position. So there was a battle there that it seemed to indicate that the Ukrainians took some positions. Anyways, we moved down to Bakhmut. Not a lot going on to the north of Bakhmut. If we go to Rebar, pro-Russian source, talks about heavy fighting continuing near Kreminna in the wooded areas along the banks of the Seversky Donets River. Russian special forces, supported with Luhansk People's Republic units, are conducting an offensive in the forest area. Actually, just before we get to Bakhmut, I do want to rewind a little bit, because this is quite interesting what the ISW says, that the Russian VDV, those the airborne forces, usually used as kind of elite crack forces. They've been given TOS-1 systems. These are the thermobaric MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems, for the first time. This indicates that possibly these guys are being given, priority in the area. But it's interesting that the airborne will be given that. These guys are being used more as your general infantry, kind of, not so much the sweeping for crack elite activities, but for your slugging out on the front line and being given pretty heavy artillery systems to do that. So I guess there's something to be made of that. Not quite sure what it is. Commitment of the VDV units with TOS-1 support to this or any axis is unlikely to lend Russian troops a decisive offensive advantage, says the ISW, but it does suggest that they are likely prioritizing those units in doing offensive operations in that area. But anyway, let's go down to look at Bakhmut, as I promised. So this is the Bakhmut area. Not much to report in the northern areas. Rebar pro-Russian source says north of Bakhmut, the Wagner PMC assault groups continue to advance in the area of Selishchi. The zone of control around school number 24 has been expanded. To the east, the fighting is taking place in the vicinity of the railway station. In the center of the city, the Wagner PMS groups continue to attack the Ukrainian positions, advancing northward, and residential areas near Borisy-Horbatova Street have been liberated. Fighting is underway near school number 11 and the Metalla Stadium. I'll show you all these places in a minute. In the southern part of the city, Ukrainian units continue to hold key positions, resisting desperately. Nevertheless, the assault units expanded their zone of control around the Avangard Stadium, advancing along Bakhmutska Street. And that's what it says about that. So let's go to look at null reports before going to Syriac maps. Null reports is pro-Ukrainian source. In the front, Wagner makes territorial gains in the center of Bakhmut. It's unlikely that Ukrainian troops still have full control over the area to the northeast. To the southwest, it is stable. There's a real possibility Ukrainian troops have taken up new positions west of the train tracks. This is the idea that the Ukrainians, so we zoom in, the Ukrainians are struggling to maintain positions in this northerly area, well, actually the northeast and the south east as well. Might have stabilized a little bit in the southwest, particularly outside of Bakhmut, but certainly the net is closing all around. And they might have adopted positions to the west of this railway track, ceding more and more of this territory. You can see the difference between the yellow lines, which is the deep state map, and the red lines are Syriac maps. So Syriac maps, I haven't actually changed my map here to suggest that the Ukrainian control in this northerly area has been pushed back here, and I'll show you this on Syriac maps in a second, bit of real-time mapping. And over here where you can see that they have advanced pretty much all around Bakhmut and in the northwest as well, northeast as well. Okay, so you can see the difference, as I was saying, between the pro-Ukrainian map in yellow or orange and the pro-Russian map in red. There's still some disparity between those claims, all over those front lines. I need to change my southern area as well. Well, let's go to Syria, see what the areas that have been taken as according to them. Current situation in Bakhmut city. Russians have advanced from the different axis and made new gains in Ivangrad, Selishchi, reaching the Alley of Roses, Komarovka, taking full control over the micro district and surrounding Bakhmut Station 1 and Vodokanal districts. So you can see this Valley of the Roses up there, as they've advanced down through the metallurgical plant, the Azon plant, they are taking areas adjacent to that, and then small areas down in this southeastern districts. Right, let's have a look and see what ISW says. So the ISW says, they've lost all those positions, or there are claims that the Ukrainians have lost those positions. Says there's heavy fighting on the T0504 highway from Chasiv to Bakhmut in the Ivanivska sector, and that Ukrainian military officials supported ISW's assessment that Russian VDV forces are increasingly supporting Wagner operations in Bakhmut. And this is a case of they have to get some win before the offensive is over, and the Wagner group are still making advances, of course, but it is slow and painful for Wagner. So we would expect Russian regular forces to be used more and more. That has been happening over the last month or so, and as Wagner struggle to recruit their own sort of convict forces, they've been disabled from doing that by the Russian MOD, I believe. So that means that Wagner will need increasing assistance from people like the VDV, the airborne units. It is tough. As I said, the last couple of days, the Ukrainians appear to be happy enough. I don't really mean a turn of phrase to cede territory in Bakhmut as long as it is costing the Russian forces enough. There's this calculation that is taking place. It appears that they're happy to defend here, or they're willing to defend here as long as it is not excessively costly for the Ukrainian forces, and the calculation is in favor of their forces in the Russian losses. So again, a slow meat grinding attritional situation all around Bakhmut, but they still hold Bakhmut. And you wonder at this rate how long this will take, and whether at some point the Ukrainians will halt the advance, and whether the Russians will run out of resources, really, will exhaust themselves and properly culminate, or they would just grind this out and take the whole of Bakhmut eventually. Pro-Russian voices are saying, well, Bakhmut's going to fall, though people in my threads yesterday talk about how Bakhmut will fall and then it'll all fall like dominoes. Well, man, this is the biggest, fattest domino that's not fallen. And if this is anything to judge other places like Chasiv Yar, Konstantinivka on, then do you know what? It ain't going to fall like a bunch of dominoes, and you don't really know what you're talking about. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, coming out of Bakhmut and going down to Avdivka, not any mapping changes there of note. The ISW makes the usual claims that everywhere around Avdivka is seeing activity, unsuccessful offensive actions. Avdivka, Severna, Novokolotnove, Pervomaisky, Vodyanyi, all around there. So north and south. This is interesting. A Ukrainian Tavrisk direction forces joint press center spokesman Dmitrash Kivsky stated on April 2nd that the Russian forces in the Donetsk city direction retreated from unspecified positions, and that Ukrainian forces are reoccupying those newly captured positions. I'm not sure exactly where that is. There was talk a couple of days ago. Warmap had said that the Russians would push back in this general area, but I haven't seen that claim anywhere else. If we go to look at Warmapper's Avdivka map, they report no changes in the last 24 hours, no confirmed changes since the last update. So I'm not quite sure what that would refer to. He also reported on April the 3rd that unspecified Russian special forces elements have recently deployed in the Donetsk city area, and that the 200th separate motorized rifle brigade was recently withdrew from the Avdivka area for recovery. So the Russian forces are reconstituting or redeploying, rotating. But that the special forces elements of special forces are there. Russian mill bloggers are claiming that there are attacks to the south and the northeast, as you would expect. And really, we're now going to get on to, although it's only mentioned here that there's fighting on the southwestern outskirts of near Marinka. I don't know whether this, because sometimes Marinka is under the umbrella of Donetsk city direction. So these newly recaptured positions could be down in Marinka, because has been some good news for the Ukrainians around Marinka. So not much to say about Avdivka, but as we come down to look at Marinka here, there's been some movement of the map in that direction. So we look at what Rebar says, a pro-Russian source, talks about Marinka. In Marinka, there being fierce street fighting in the city center and the northern outskirts. The Ukrainians have moved fresh forces into the city, including tanks, reinforcing the defensive grouping in the settlement, but doesn't mention anything about any territory being lost there. No reports, on the other hand, pro-Ukrainian source says in Marinka there are reports that forces in the center of Marinka have carried out a number of counterattacks at Pobieda, which is this small rural settlement to the south of Marinka, which is a key to stopping the town being surrounded by the Russians. At Pobieda, Russian troops would also have been forced back several hundred meters due to the counterattack. The impact on the map in these attacks is not yet clear, so there could be mapping changes in Marinka itself. I've got mapping changes around Pobieda as according to Deep State Map. So Deep State Map have pushed. So if you remember, I had Syriac Map saying that the Russians had a foothold in Pobieda. This group of settlements, this group of buildings there. Deep State has had them pushed back from there to this line now, so that is considerable pushing back of the troops, Russian troops there, which then protects Marinka from being flanked, certainly to the south. I don't know what's going on in the center of Bakhmut. I'm sure there will be mapping changes. Still not unsure of what's going on exactly around this area of the north of Marinka, with Syriac maps claiming that the Russians have made advances there last week, but no other confirmation of that. So, yeah, a lot of activity taking place in Marinka, but not really reported in the ISW. If we go on to the south from Marinka and we come to Vuhledar, past Novomikhailivka, we have Vuhledar here and Mikhailska, Pavlivka just to the south on the lower ground there. Yes, they're reported there's a tiny bit of ground taken by the Russians north of Mikhailska, sorry. Words. The ISW says that on April the 3rd, the Ukrainians claim that their unsuccessful attacks on April the 2nd, but no operations on April the 3rd. And that the Russians have claimed that there were repelled attacks from the Ukrainian reconnaissance and force operations southwest of Donetsk city. And geolocated footage posted on April the 2nd shows that Russian forces likely hold positions in Dorozhnyanka in Zaporizhia. So what that means is that there are reconnaissance and force attacks somewhere around here, or maybe around this whole area from the Ukrainians, repelled by the Russians. That there were no attacks yesterday, but there were the day before towards Vuhledar from the Russians. And then if we come to the west along the line to Zaporizhia, there are claims there in the ISW that there is some presence of the Russians in Dorozhnyanka. So this has swapped sides a number of times, this settlement, as there was an attack there a month, maybe 6 weeks ago from the Russians. Very little resistance from the Ukrainians. They didn't have any troops there. And then apparently they took it back. Well, that might now be in the hands of the Russians, but not too sure about that. Other than that, there's not too much to report in terms of activity in Zaporizhia. As according to the ISW, there's lots of talk about defenses being built in the Crimea area. In fact, there's footage, there's talk on the socials about more and more defenses being built in Crimea. So they really are doing everything they can to offset the potential for a Ukrainian attack there. And then finally, something to say which is of note. Ukrainian head of Southern Operational Command Press Center Humenyuk stated that the pace of Russian shelling in Kherson Oblast has decreased from 90 to 100 rounds per day in the prior week to 50 to 60 in the current week. So that only 60 rounds of artillery a day being used in that area. That is very low number of artillery rounds being shot in the Kherson Oblast. Anyway, I spoke to you this morning about the attacks on Odessa. So lots of Shahid drones being sent up to Odessa from probably Crimea. sent over from there, but not 100% sure. That's the main news over the last night. One of them causing some significant damage to something, maybe in ammunition or fuel depot in the area. But other than that, that's the frontline update. Not a huge amount of movement across the front lines. There is this continued constriction of the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, and it's going to be interesting to see whether they halt that or whether they let the Russians take Bakhmut, but just at a huge loss to the Russian capacity in the area. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And check out the live I'm doing later this evening, UK time, with Anastasia from Kharkiv.